Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, August 21st, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Biden approved a new nuclear war strategy. So the New York Times reported on Tuesday that President Biden approved back in March a new nuclear strategic plan that includes preparations for a simultaneous nuclear war with Russia, China, and North Korea. So this U.S. nuclear strategy is updated every 4 years or so, according to this report. And it's a very highly classified document. The New York Times described the new strategy as the first to examine in detail whether the United States is prepared to respond to nuclear crises that break out simultaneously or sequentially with a combination of nuclear and non-nuclear weapons. So it's essentially saying this is the first time that they're really preparing for a multi-front nuclear war as a possibility, with Russia and China growing closer together, and you see Russia and North Korea growing closer together as well. And of course, this is all a result of the U.S. trying to sanction, Russia and China, and the policies against them are naturally bringing Russia and China closer together. So while this is very classified, U.S. officials have mentioned this in public, including Pranay Vadi. He's an arms control official on the National Security Council. He said back in June that the new U.S. nuclear strategy emphasizes, quote, the need to deter Russia, the People's Republic of China, and North Korea simultaneously. The strategy also focuses on China for the first time. According to the New York Times, the strategy, this is a new thing as well, that it's focusing on China. And the Pentagon is claiming that China could increase its nuclear stockpile to 1,500 by 2035. This is just what the Pentagon says, based on intelligence, so we don't really know if that's true. The U.S. government certainly has a history of hyping up things about, nuclear armed competitors to justify building more weapons and everything. And China is kind of the big boogeyman now that they're using to justify all these military buildups in Asia. They are talking about the U.S. getting more nuclear weapons, which is crazy. Current estimates, according to the Arms Control Association, puts China's arsenal at about 500, which is just a fraction of what the U.S. and Russia have. The State Department actually put out updated U.S. numbers last month in July that said the U.S. has 5,748 nuclear warheads, and that includes 2,000 that are retired and awaiting to be dismantled. And then according to the Arms Control Association, Russia has 5,580 warheads, so about 200 fewer than the U.S. And in recent years, Russia has had a few hundred more warheads than the U.S., but now the U.S. has a couple hundred more. But anyway, so 1,200 of those Russian warheads are retired and awaiting dismantlement. And then both the U.S. and Russia, they still comply with the limits set by the New START Treaty. And that is the treaty that caps the deployment of nuclear warheads at 1,550. So that treaty has essentially fallen apart. The U.S. and Russia are not doing the inspection part of it. Arms control is completely broken down. The U.S. has torn up a lot of agreements, pulled out of a lot of deals with Russia, and the New START is going to expire in 2026. So I think there's a good chance that after that, we might start seeing more nuclear warheads being deployed. We've seen the head of STRATCOM, U.S. Strategic Command, say that the U.S. should get more nukes. So, they're talking about that. While we discuss this, China, it's true, China has significantly fewer nukes than the U.S. and Russia. But if there is a nuclear exchange between the U.S. and China, that could, end life as we know it, or we would at least lose a few American cities. And then you talk about the fallout and the, I mean, it's just something that can't happen. The U.S. and China cannot go to war because it could quickly become a nuclear war. But despite that risk, the U.S. is openly planning for a future war with China. They named China, the top threat. That's what the Pentagon says. Russia is number 2. And we see U.S. military officials, again, openly discussing the idea of fighting a war with China over Taiwan. You had General Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, recently say he thinks the U.S. could beat China in a war over Taiwan. I think in a war between the U.S. and China, there's not going to be any winners. It's a war that can't happen, yet they're planning for it anyway. And apparently they're planning for something even bigger than that with this nuclear strategy. All right, so the next one here, Netanyahu is purposely sabotaging hostage deal. Maybe this is not news for us anymore, but more, reporting in Israeli media saying that Netanyahu is purposely trying to make sure a deal doesn't happen. And this was reported by Khan, which is Israel's public broadcaster. It said that members of Israel's negotiating team believe Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is purposely trying to sabotage the chances of a deal with Hamas. A source speaking to Khan referred to Netanyahu saying on Tuesday that he would not give up Israeli control of the Gaza-Egypt border, known as the Philadelphia Corridor, or the Netzarim Corridor, which is that strip of land that separates northern Gaza from the rest of the territory. This source, again, this is an Israeli source in the negotiating team, said, quote, Netanyahu's statement is intended to blow up the negotiations. There's no other way about it. The prime minister knows that we are in a critical period during which we are working on solutions for the Philadelphia Corridor and Netzarim ahead of the next summit. He knows there is progress, and then he puts out statements that are the opposite of what was agreed upon with the mediators, end quote. So a U.S. official traveling with Secretary of State Antony Blinken also told the Times of Israel that Netanyahu's comments about the Philadelphia Corridor were hurting the negotiations. This official said, quote, maximalist statements like this are not constructive to getting a ceasefire deal across the finish line, end quote. So Blinken, while you have that official saying that, of course, Blinken and the U.S. is not publicly criticizing Netanyahu. And Blinken is instead saying that Hamas has to agree to this deal, So he said on Monday, quote, in a very constructive meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu today, he confirmed to me that Israel supports the bridging proposal. The next important step is for Hamas to say yes, end quote. So that bridging proposal that he refers to, that is this new proposal from the U.S. that includes basically all of Netanyahu's demands. It's not a permanent ceasefire. And this is what Israeli officials told Axios Netanyahu agreed to. They said he agreed to it because he knew that Hamas wouldn't agree to it. So there's still, this game is still being played here, and yet you have the U.S. still saying, all we need is Hamas to say yes. And Hamas said on Tuesday that the new proposal was a reversal, and they're calling for the proposal that President Biden outlined back in May. They want that one to be implemented. All right, so the next one here, Israeli military recovers 6 bodies of Israeli hostages in Gaza. The Israeli military said Tuesday that its forces recovered the bodies of 6 Israeli hostages in the southern Gaza city of Khan Yunis. According to Ynet, initial findings show that 5 of the Israelis were killed as a result of a nearby Israeli airstrike. The strike caused a fire, which flooded the tunnel where they were held with carbon monoxide, killing the 5 Israelis and Hamas guards that were holding them. The other hostage was shot, according to an autopsy. So Israeli airstrikes killing more hostages in Gaza. According to Axios, there are now 109 hostages remaining in Gaza, and about half of them are presumed to be dead. In response to the news of the 6 bodies being recovered, a group representing hostage families called for a deal with Hamas. So you have the hostage families saying, it's time to make a deal. Trying to put the pressure on Netanyahu. And family members of the 6 men whose bodies were recovered blame their deaths on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has been working to sabotage the chances of a deal, as we just covered in the other story. So Maddie Danzig, his father Alex, was among the recovered bodies. He said, quote, "He and all the hostages could have been brought back. Netanyahu chose to sacrifice the hostages. Karma will judge him, and he will pay for it big time," end quote. One thing I've been meaning to cover is that there's been some polls this month in Israel that show Netanyahu is favorable. He's kind of leading the polls again, which, for a while he was doing very poorly in the polls. So it goes to show, I think what he's been doing, prolonging this genocidal war, while there is a lot of pressure on him from the hostage families and from his political opponents inside Israel, it seems like people are still supporting Netanyahu. All right, so the next one here, Nightmare at Sadeh Teiman, the untold story of Ibrahim Salem. So this article is from Mondo Weiss, and it is an interview with Ibrahim Salem, who was the man at the Israeli torture camp at Sadeh Teiman, which has become a very notorious facility. If you remember, there was a big report in CNN about it, and there was a photo leaked by an Israeli whistleblower of a Palestinian man standing blindfolded with his hands behind his head. And behind him are all these other Palestinians with blindfolds on, sitting on the floor. And this is that man that's interviewed here, and kind of just details the torture and the horrific abuse that he faced inside the Israeli prison. He said that he was captured by Israeli forces while he was at a hospital where his children were. They were wounded in an airstrike. Some of his family members were killed. And the Israeli military ordered the floor that he was on to be evacuated, except for the patients, and he didn't leave he didn't want to leave his children. So then the Israeli military detained him, made him strip naked, and apparently threw him in a hole for 2 days. He didn't know where that was. And one thing that's common here is that he says when they would take him to interrogate him, they would make him strip naked, just humiliation, and that sort of sexual abuse that we see in the other cases of them, doing really horrific things. So go check out this interview at Mondo Weiss if you have the stomach for it. All right, so the next one here, DNC platform pledges ironclad support for Israel. So on Monday, delegates at the Democratic National Convention voted to adopt the party's new 2024 platform, which vows ironclad support for Israel amid its U.S.-backed genocidal war in Gaza. The platform reads, quote, "President Biden and Vice President Harris believe a strong, secure, and democratic Israel is vital to the interests of the United States. Their commitment to Israel's security, its qualitative military edge, its right to defend itself, and the 2016 Memorandum of Understanding is ironclad," end quote. So the 2016 Memorandum of Understanding, that was agreed to during the Obama administration, and that committed the U.S. to providing Israel with $3.8 billion in military aid each year from 2019 to 2028. They're probably going to start negotiating the next one soon if they haven't already. That's something I think they wanted to do during this Biden administration. Israel wanted to do during this Biden administration. So if not, it'll probably happen in the next year or two, I would guess. Because the 2016 Memorandum of Understanding was a 10-year deal for $38 billion in military aid for Israel. It's just a huge number. And this strong commitment to arming Israel comes amid protests at the DNC for Vice President Kamala Harris, the 2024 nominee, of course, to commit to imposing an arms embargo on Israel. But Harris is not expected to alter U.S. policy toward Israel. And the Democratic Party's platform also claims that President Biden has been working for peace in the Middle East and a ceasefire deal in Gaza. But of course, his administration has not actually put any pressure on Israel to agree to a ceasefire. They keep giving them military aid. So this 92-page platform also boasts of Biden's new military interventions in the Middle East, including the bombing campaign against the Houthis in Yemen, which has only escalated the situation in the Red Sea. You know, they listed that as like an achievement. It's unbelievable. And it's, you know, trying to show how tough Biden is. And it also mentioned the U.S. defense of Israel from an Iranian attack in April, which was Iran's response to the Israeli bombing of the consulate in Damascus. So regarding that, the platform reads, quote, through direct defensive action by the U.S. military and its partners, Iranian munitions did not cause significant damage, demonstrating both America's ironclad commitment to the security of Israel and our unrivaled ability to leverage growing regional integration among U.S. partners to counter Iranian aggression, end quote. So really, you know, essentially saying that the U.S. is going to defend Israel from Iran. The Republican Party's new platform, which was adopted in July, it was much shorter than this Democratic Party platform, but it did mention, it did also offer support for Israel. It said, quote, we will stand with Israel and seek peace in the Middle East, end quote. And of course, if supporting Israel is what they consider seeking peace, then that's clearly not what they're doing. But anyway, in that Republican Party platform, Israel was the only foreign country that was mentioned favorably in the whole thing, and it was very short compared to the Democrat one. The Democratic Party platform also lists the proxy war in Ukraine and the U.S. military buildup in the Asia Pacific as achievements of the Biden administration. The platform says Biden has recognized China as America's most consequential strategic competitor, aligning with the Pentagon's view that China is the top threat. And of course, we've seen Biden and his administration say that all along. All right, so the next one here, Biden supporters block Stop Arming Israel sign at DNC. So this article's from Ryan Grimm at his new site, Drop Site News, and he was on the floor. I believe he filmed this footage. So there were some Democrats that were actually on the floor of the DNC during Biden's speech. Oh, that was another thing. I didn't realize when I was recording last night that Biden was actually gave his speech Monday night. It was like at midnight or something. And of course, he repeated all these lies about working for a ceasefire and peace and everything, and you know, just complete nonsense. But anyway, so there were delegates who were on the floor who held up a sign that said, a big banner that said "Stop Arming Israel." And Ryan Grimm said he was a few feet away when the banner went up and witnessed a surreal scene as delegates around them tried to block it with "We Love Joe" and USA signs. Some delegates tried to rip the banner away from the protesting DNC members, but they held on tight as others intervened, urging the crowd to raise their signs as high as possible, but not cause a violent scene. Several of them began using signs to block my camera and that of a Democracy Now! Reporter. One delegate followed me through the crowd relentlessly with impressive determination, putting his USA sign in front of my phone as I worked to avoid him. The protest starts nearly 8 minutes into the video, so they have the video here, and I mean, it's really something to see, you know, Joe Biden signs being used, "We Love Joe" signs being used to stop, to block a sign that says "Stop Arming Israel." You know, it just goes to show the attitude there. Yeah, they all pile in front of them. So I'm happy somebody got the footage of it on here. All right, so the next one here, Gaza death toll for Palestinian journalists at 170. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. A journalist was killed along with 11 other Palestinians by an Israeli airstrike on a Gaza school, pushing the death toll for members of the media in Gaza to 170. So Hamza Abdul Rahman Mortaja was killed in Gaza City while sheltering at the Mustafa Hafez school. And again, 11 other people were killed. And it said that as many as 20 Palestinians remained trapped under the rubble. Before the strike, 700 displaced Palestinians were sheltering at the school. That's what schools have become, shelters for civilians, since Palestinian children have not been in school for 10 months now. So again, the 170th journalist that has been killed. And this is why, I joined that letter to Antony Blinken calling for the U.S. to end, arms shipments to Israel, which focused on the death toll among journalists. You have Blinken go out there and say press freedom matters and everything while supporting this military that's just been slaughtering journalists. All right, so the next... Oh, and someone mentioned, I think it might have been in comments or something, someone asked me, because I mentioned in one show, maybe when I covered that letter, that they haven't let foreign journalists into Gaza. At one point they let CNN in, and maybe a couple other outlets were able to go in at one point, but for the most part, they haven't let foreign journalists in. So people ask me, who's reporting this? And, all the big, international news agencies have journalists in Gaza, including Reuters. We use their pictures, and they're from Palestinians who are in Gaza who work for Reuters, the Associated Press, Al Jazeera, of course. I know Middle East Eye has reporters, I think AFP. So all the big news agencies have people in Gaza. And that was one thing, what was it, 2021? Maybe it was after that. Israel, in one of their bombing campaigns in Gaza a few years ago, they destroyed a high-rise building that had the offices of the Associated Press, Al Jazeera, and Middle East Eye. And there's all these claims that it was there's a Hamas office in the building as well, which, of course, that I don't think would justify destroying a high-rise building because there's one Hamas office in there. But it was actually revealed by 972 magazine when they had that big report about what they call power targets in Gaza, which are essentially civilian targets that they destroy for the purpose of putting pressure on the civilians. That report revealed that building was a power target. So they knew they were just targeting a civilian building in that. So it's, Israel's war on journalism in Gaza. All right, so the next one here, Israel strikes market and school in Gaza, killing 20 Palestinians. So this is from Al Jazeera. This is also about the school strike that killed the journalist. But at least 20 more Palestinians have been killed in another deadly day in Gaza after Israeli forces targeted a busy market and a school sheltering the displaced people. At least 8 Palestinians were killed on Tuesday in an Israeli attack on a crowded market in Deir el-Balah in central Gaza, according to an Al Jazeera correspondent on the scene, who said the number of dead could rise. She said many children were injured in the attack that hit an area less than a kilometer away from the Al-Aqsa hospital, where most of the injured were brought. At least 10 Palestinians, including children, were in the ICU after the strike. Most of the wounded were children, according to this reporter. And then I did see a picture from Reuters of Palestinian children covered in blood, just laying on the floor of the hospital. So, of course, it's just, always children being killed and wounded in these big airstrikes. All right, so the next one here, Ukraine's parliament votes to ban the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. So Ukraine's parliament voted on Tuesday on a bill that would ban the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which has historic links to Russia, but severed ties with the Moscow Patriarchate following the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine. So this is the UOC, not to be confused with the OCU, which is the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, but this is the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. So this church denounced the Russian invasion very strongly and criticized the Moscow Patriarchate for supporting the war. Patriarch Kirill, I believe his name is. But that wasn't enough for Ukrainian officials who have still accused this church of having ties to Moscow. They accuse, some of the priests of collaboration. And there's been a serious crackdown on this church, which has involved the raids on the churches, the arrest of priests, and the eviction of clergy from the Kiev Pechersk Lavra, also known as the Monastery of the Caves, which is a big, beautiful monastery in Kiev. So this legislation would allow Ukrainian authorities to ban the UOC by prohibiting the activity of the Russian Orthodox Church or any religious groups tied to it. President Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to sign the bill into law, since he welcomed its passing. He said, quote, "Today I want to note the work of the parliament. A law on our spiritual independence has been adopted," end quote. So Andriy Yermak, Zelensky's chief of staff, said after the bill was passed that there will be no Moscow church in Ukraine. The Ukrainian government has supported the similarly named Orthodox Church of Ukraine, the OCU, which was granted independence from the Moscow Patriarchate by the Patriarchate of Constantinople in 2019. And the American Conservative has a lot of interesting reporting on this. I want to run, they have a new article about it. I think it's called Ukraine's Two Wars. It's about the spiritual, the religious war that's been happening inside Ukraine, the crackdown on this church. And this, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, the one that they're cracking down on, it's disputed which one is bigger. If you'll see a lot of stories say that the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, the one that the Kiev authorities are kind of handing churches over to, they'll say that that's the biggest. But if you look at the number of parishes and clergy, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, the one that they're banning, has, as of 2022, 2023, numbers back then had significantly more parishes and clergy. Now those numbers could be different, but that's because of this crackdown. And again, this American Conservative piece that I want to run gets into these raids, like violent raids, violent attacks on these churches, people going in there with pipes and beating people, smashing icons and things like that. So, this it's a really kind of underreported thing. Even our coverage of it has been pretty minimal. So I kind of want to look into, focus on it a little more. But as of 2023, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church remained the largest of the two Orthodox churches, as only a small number of parishes decided to join the OCU following the Russian invasion. And there was an interesting quote in one of those American Conservative pieces of a Ukrainian soldier who fought on the front lines for over a year and wanted to go back to his church, and basically saying, how can they say that we're pro-Russia when I was just fighting the Russians? Because to a lot of people, they just want to go to their church that they've always gone to, and they're really cracking down. All right, so the last one here, the IRGC says that retaliation against Israel may take a long time. So Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, said Tuesday that it could be a long time before Iran launches a reprisal attack against Israel for the killing of Hamas's political chief in Tehran. So this is Ali Mohammed Naini. He is the IRGC spokesman. He said, quote, "Time is on our side and the waiting period may be long. Zionists must remain in a state of imbalance," end quote. So a major Joe Biden does that once in a while. He calls Iran Ukraine, I think. But a major Iranian attack on Israel appeared imminent in the wake of the Israeli killing of Ismail Haniyeh, but it never came. According to recent media reports, Iran is believed to be waiting to see how the hostage deal and ceasefire negotiations play out before retaliating. Naini, the IRGC, is still vowing that Iran will respond and said that it could be different from Iran's April attack, which came in response to the bombing of the Iranian consulate in Damascus. He said, quote, "Our commanders know how to punish the enemy effectively and are not prone to hasty action," end quote. So the U.S. is still pledging to defend Israel and deployed military assets to the region for that purpose. Blinken said when he was in Tel Aviv on Monday, quote, "We are fully prepared to defend Israel," end quote. So we'll see if it happens. So that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints, one from Norman Solomon. Biden's convention speech made absurd claims about his Gaza policy. One from Ted Snyder, the cost of Kursk. One from Doug Bandow, both parties got us to where we are on foreign policy. One from Hanin Majadil, when settler violence targets Israelis instead of Palestinians. And one from Stavrula Pabst, how the Pentagon built Silicon Valley. So please go check all of that out. One thing I want to remind everybody of is coming up is the Ron Paul Liberty Institute's event, the Liberty Platform, which will be on Saturday, August 31st in Washington, D.C. I put the link in the description. I will be attending. I'm going to be speaking at the student portion, which is on August 30th, the day before. And then I'll be attending the conference the next day. I'll be hanging out in the hotel bar probably on Friday night. But it's a really fun time. I know a lot of people who are going. And if you're interested in foreign policy, I mean, it's very, they always focus very much on foreign policy. The speakers include, of course, Dan McAdams and Ron Paul, John Mearsheimer, Judge Napolitano, who I think YouTube just took down one of his shows or something. Also, Jeff Deist is going to be there. Joel Salatin, if you're familiar with him, big in the farming world. So yeah, it's going to be really cool. Tickets are $85. I would say it is totally going to be worth it. But maybe I'll see you there. Let me know if you're going. So that is it for me for today. Please support us by sharing this show. Tell your friends about antiwar.com. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.